Welcome to MarTalks, the #1 podcast for e-commerce and marketing applications. MarTalks is devoted to covering the latest technology developments that drive the global commerce ecosystem from advertising to last mile. Enjoy all of our content at rosensteingroup.com/martalks-podcast.
Well, hey, thank you so much for tuning into MarTalks. I'm your host, Daryl Rosenstein. And today, one of my favorite people in the world of e-commerce was a member of the NRF, was a member of the MACH Alliance, actually the founder of the MACH Alliance, now president of Pipe17 and avid walleye fisherman. My favorite aspect, Kelly Goetsch. Kelly, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me. I was good to chat.
Absolutely. You know, I have a lot that I wanted to cover with you today, and we'll try to compress it. But I was at the B2B E-commerce Association inaugural conference last week and actually got to speak with a number of crazed chief digital officers and chief technical officers about what they were there to learn, what their issues were. I didn't solve any of their problems, which, really isn't my job. That's yours. So a couple things came up that I wanted to talk about with you. One of them is composable commerce is certainly the wave of the future. It is the best way to construct your B2B and B2C stack so that it is infinitely modifiable without and retires a ton of your legacy debt and becomes more flexible in the process. There's still a fair amount of misunderstanding at this point of how to transition to composable. From what you're hearing out there, what have you heard has been the best first step that these chief technical officers and chief digital officers should take in making that transition?
Let's just start small. It's to try to not do everything all at once. I think many make the mistake of going to, some giant SI and scoping out a 2-year project and, spending a lot of money on it. And I think that's the worst possible way to get started. I think the best way is to grab a small team internally and take something that you were going to build anyway and expose that as a microservice, right? Put an API over the top of it, and learn to manage that, right? Because that's what composability is. It's about exposing granular pieces of functionality up and, go get some muscle developed doing that. And then from there, expand out. It's really what you have.
That makes total sense. There was a speaker that talked about AI sales agents essentially serving as business development reps, which we're very familiar with now in the software world, but is still new to the bulk of the B2B community.
Right.
And, they were even talking about the pushback they're getting from their sales teams in adopting the new technology. They're afraid it's going to displace them versus focusing on the good parts, which is it's going to be quicker to configure orders. It's going to be easier for your customers to repeat their orders. You're going to have more data about them. You're going to be able to upsell, cross-sell, all of the benefits that we're very aware of within software, but yet are so new to, for the most part, technologically unsophisticated manufacturers and distributors. I was kind of dumbfounded by how many of them didn't even have a platform. Where do you mentioned that to me as well.
Well, they're going to peril. It's table stakes these days to have some type of direct-to-consumer business. A lot of the big distributors have their own house and private label brands that they're using to sell against the name brands. And whenever possible, they're going to cut folks right out of the loop and start selling direct, right? That's what they're going to do. And they have done that repeatedly. Look at how Sam's and Walmart have done this across the board, on the direct-to-consumer side. It's crazy.
It's crazy to me. And, something was very notable from the conference, and that was the lack of attendance by Shopify and how Shopify was not figuring into any of the serious discussions that I had. It's just not seen as a viable B2B commerce platform. And I said it, it's not controversial. It's just kind of, even from a multi-channel order management perspective, that is not their strong suit. And they're they're designed for pretty basic consumer sites, and they do a fine job at that. But the businesses, they need something different. They need something that's heavily integrated into their CRM and their Salesforce automation package, and that was something they were looking for. Now, one of the problems that they're coming up with, another one, they had two or three, was getting at that siloed data. And it occurred to me that, in adopting composable commerce, they are better able to get at that data and secondarily adopt new AI technologies because of the exercise of
Right.
going composable.
Right. Composability is a prerequisite to AI for sure.
That was something that was somewhat missing from the content. And I thought that was a pretty important thing. It's like, look, folks, if you want to take a big risk, just go headlong into an enterprise AI project.
Yeah, exactly. Go
Do we
hire
have any
someone. I
ROI
think
on those
blind
yet?
leading the blind at that point
Do we have any ROI on any of those yet?
on big AI projects.
Yeah, big AI projects.
I mean, I think looking at it as an AI project is probably the wrong way to look at it. Instead, the way I look at it is it's an application, you're delivering some functionality. Whether it happens to use AI or not is orthogonal to the business problem it's solving. If it's using AI and it does a better job, great. We've had technologies over the decades that have been incrementally and sometimes, dramatically better than their predecessor. AI is just a better algorithm, better way of doing things. But I wouldn't call it, them AI projects per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was a lot of questions about, what AI can do for an organization.
Yeah.
And the content that I saw that was pretty compelling was essentially giving you a much better customer service capability is one of the things an AI agent does extremely well for a business.
hmm
Answering those questions, tackling where is an order,
hmm
tackling what if there's an issue with a product, getting them to the right person, and that instantaneous, that 24/7 availability. Every customer loves it. Don't you love it if your customer wakes up at 3 a.m. with a problem with one of your products or services that they can actually have an
Yeah.
interaction with your brand? And
Yeah.
that's AI is doing that. Where's the ROI? We don't know yet. I think we're going to look at it in terms of churn, maybe.
I mean, if you really want to get philosophical about it, it's intelligence and the cost of what was formerly human only intelligence is plummeting basically to zero. So think of human intelligence and where you could apply that, right? That now becomes something that you can offer to all of your customers. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of product recommendations. I think that's pretty straightforward. There are a lot of customer, service recommendations and advisory services. That's good. Building websites, building experiences. That's good. And I think those are all great, but those are very limited first generation use cases because they're
Yeah.
happening within an application. I always call it the Clippy problem, right? It's like Microsoft's old Clippy agent, fine within the application, but folks are using AI as the head these days, and they're in their chat GPTs and their Claudes and so on all day long. In that world, you need to be able to interact with your data and functionality, and model context protocol is the bridge from your SaaS application up to that wide world of AI. And that's where the innovation is really taking place. But you can only get that data out if you're using composability. Natively, you can expose that data up and you have MCP over the top of it.
Well, something that occurred to me as I was perusing the vendors that were there was a prediction that I heard from Jason Lemkin not long ago that traditional SaaS companies are short for the world because all of the investors have flocked to AI. And if you're a traditional SaaS offering and you're not profitable or growing on par with a AI startup, which typically is seeing 400% faster growth just due to
Right.
their low overhead, you're not going to get any more funding. What, from your perspective, unless you're native AI or you have grafted AI on as a core portion of your functionality, what do you think about that prognostication?
Companies in the top quartile in this traditional SaaS world are still getting strong funding because they're strong, healthy companies growing quickly. They're all a rule of 40. So, top quartile, great, right? I don't see any major issues there. And we're going to continue to have traditional SaaS software forever, right? if AI eventually replaces all SaaS software, I mean, we might as well just pack it up and go home and collect our universal basic income at that point, right? Rot our brains on, scrolling social media all day, right? I don't think that'll happen. I really don't. I think we're going to continue to have traditional SaaS. It's going to be AI enabled. That's going to be just fine. I think where folks are struggling is there's unprofitable SaaS that's not
Mm,
growing a lot. And those businesses are not going to get the valuation multiples that they once did.
mhm.
Rather than getting, 10 or even 20 forward revenue multiples, they're getting 2, 3, right?
Yeah, it's
Which, look,
brutal.
it's still, these companies are still worth a lot, right? They still are. The difference is, that for employees at least, it's the difference between not getting anything and getting retirement level money,
Mhm,
right? So the VCs still do fine. Everybody's still employed, but they're just not making a whole lot off the upside on the equity. And I mean, equity is always intended to be a bonus, basically, not as necessarily part of a guaranteed pay package, unless you're at a big public company that's very stable, right? So I get that. Where folks are chasing AI is, I think there's a lot of FOMO in the market for sure.
for
You've
sure.
also seen a handful of companies, I mean, less than 10 in the world that have, 1000x growth, right? And
Mhm,
they start out with small bases and they quickly get to 100 million. I think a lot of those companies, though, are consumer based. They're not selling to enterprise, they're selling instead to
mhm.
consumers. Think of somebody like 11 Labs for voice, right? And I think what they're doing is cool, but I don't think it's worth what they've been fundraising at, which is what, like $6 billion or something crazy like that. And, a lot of these on the consumer side, at least, if they're growing that quickly, a lot of times folks are prepaying for a year of the service or they're on month to month. And if you take a month to month and you extrapolate that out, very quickly, that looks like giant ARR. What I would wanna look at is, what does the churn look like? You
Yep.
know, and do a full retention analysis and figure out, like, which cohort of customers churn and which ones don't. And I think the only real way to get to, enterprise level stability and, and repeatability of revenue is to go out and hire a full enterprise team, and it takes a while. Big enterprise deal takes 6, 12, 18 months to close. And almost by definition, if you're going after the market that way, you can't have 1000x growth. It doesn't work, it doesn't scale. But the revenue that you do get is also a lot stickier. And that's
Mhm.
the key. It's not just somebody pulling out a credit card, it's, an entire company having bought into something and then being in a contract for 3 years. So folks want that predictability of revenue, very much so.
Consumers are notoriously fickle and chasing the latest fad or fashion. So if your application happens to be one of those, your AI offering happens to be one of those, it's like woe be you to
Right.
forecast your growth based on those consumers because what new logo is going to show up tomorrow that's going to displace you and make it easier for them to figure out where to get their coffee creamer.
And that's exactly it. Switching costs are very low. I know I had a subscription to 11 Labs and I used it a few times and then I canceled it. And that's okay, But like that's what I think a lot of the valuation is on. And folks, the ways I mean there's a spectrum of investors, right? So on one side of the spectrum, you're doing seed rounds and you basically want 1000x your return. And the thought is let's put, 250,000 or $500,000 and spread that across 100 different companies, and one of them is going to return 1000x and pay back the whole fund and then some. So I get that. A lot of folks have done that. The other approach is the more traditional private equity side, where they're buying businesses that are just putting out cash and they're treating it, like you'd buy a rental property, for example, right? Where the rental property is, it's a cash producing asset, but it's still at the end of the day a rental property. You're not going to have a 10x valuation of your apartment that you're renting out, right? With any luck. But that spectrum is why I think a lot of folks are investing in these big rounds in these very early stage companies. The other factor is, in bubble times, it's who's last holding the bag that suffers financially. So if you buy into somebody that's very early and buzzy, you put in a seed round, by your series A, you've 100x the return. So you take your principal out And then, Series B comes around, and then Series C comes around, and it's the, A and B and C investors who do really, really, really well for themselves. They take their money off the table and then some. It's the Series C investor when the bubble pops who gets left holding the bag. So even as a VC, you're still pretty well protected. You're pretty well protected, and you can do things like liquidation preferences so that, if the company has to get sold, or is sold for some reason, it ensures you're getting back, 2x your original investment, for example, before anybody else gets any money. And that's a way if, the bubble does pop at some point, or when it does, it's a way that they ensure that they stay whole. I call it greed. I wouldn't do one with liquidation preference, but, some do. And I get that. Right.
Yeah. Greed is exciting. It's not good. It's exciting. But you're coming down firmly on the side of we are in an AI bubble. And I kind of get a kick when I listen to the money talkers on the big network saying, yeah, the street's not sure if this is a bubble or not. It's like, what
Look,
kind of proof do you need?
there's always a correction because, per
Yeah.
the, hype cycle, you've got a giant inflated peak of expectations. AI is sitting at the very top of that and has been for quite a while. I think it still could sit up the top there for another year or two,
Mhm.
but inevitability, kicks in and you've got a trough of disillusionment. And ultimately you're going to see some real challenges with adoption and implementation.
Forward deployed engineers. Anybody have any extras out there? Those wonderful people that actually, once you've bought an AI, have to come to your place and train it, or it
Yeah.
never works.
Yeah, that's more of like a Palantir style. There are a few companies who do that, but I wouldn't call it terribly common that they're doing that.
It's like, well, you're probably not going to be able to teach 100 elephants to code. That
Yeah,
might take you a little long.
a little bit.
Anyway, well, something that didn't come up that I wish had while we were at the show was standardization. And it's always driven me crazy how many different versions of chestnut brown there are when you go online. It's like retailers can't even standardize around the Pantone scale,
Right.
which is a universal standard. It's a universal standard,
Yeah.
but they won't say, yeah, our chestnut brown couch is the same shade as, I don't know, this midnight beige
Right.
from another vendor for just do their, I don't know, copyright or their brand image or whatever.
Yeah.
But you've actually been leading a project to tackle some of that same issue around standardization.
Mhm.
And we're breaking that story here, people. We're breaking the story, folks. We're the first on the scene.
Love it.
So what is your news?
So I've got together with, at current count, it's 62 vendors and brands, including, I think I have every single vendor in the Gartner Magic Quadrant and the Forrester Wave in the OMS category. So Manhattan and Kibo and Sterling and Fluent and OneStock and Fulfillment Tools, Pipe17, of course. So I've got basically everyone signed up. And then I've got many of the major 3PLs in the country signed up. So Radial and Ryder and Geodis and a whole bunch of others, warehouse management systems and ERPs. And we're all backing a standard called the Order Network Exchange. And what that standard does is it sits on top of back office and fulfillment systems. And it uses Model Context Protocol to expose a handful of tools and a handful of resources. And a tool is a verb. Think of it as something you can do, right? You can capture an order, you can return an order, you can exchange an order, the core OMS primitives that you would expect. And then separately, we also support resources. And a resource is something like, think of it as a static object, like a noun, a thing, right? It could be a product. We've got support for orders, for inventory, static objects. And what's great about this is all of us as vendors adopt the standard. And again, I've got commitment from 60 something to support this, including all the major OMSs. And then any selling channel can just point to the MCP and say, here you go. This is how you get to your back office. So you can go from an agentic head like ChatGPT and point it directly back to a 3PL, for example. You could go from a commerce platform to a WMS. You could go from TikTok to an ERP, right? So it's a nice, clean way of exposing the data and functionality in the back office and fulfillment side of the world, exposing that up to the rest of the world on the selling channel side. And I'm a big believer in having a big tent and bringing in folks, including direct competitors. I think it's ridiculous that we haven't had a standard like this ever in our space. We see standards emerging now with agentic commerce protocol by OpenAI and Stripe and Shopify. We see AP2, which is a Google and PayPal innovation. We're seeing selling channel standards, but we're not seeing anything between the selling channels and fulfillment channels. And that's what the standard does. MACH Alliance has helped out a lot. Got to know a
Mhm.
lot of those folks through the Alliance and the work that we've done. Yeah, I mean, it's just nuts and bolts of, retail politicking to get these folks on board. And look, it's very much in their interest as well. Some of these discussions lasted 10 minutes of, here's what we're doing. Do you want to sign on? Yeah, we've been needing to do that. We need to do MCP anyway. Yes, this makes perfect sense. Let's do it. Right. So it has not been a tough sell to get folks on board with this.
Well, I think you undersell yourself. I think that you are a very level-headed, beneficent human being, and I think
Appreciate
when you
that.
have somebody like that in charge of any initiative, things tend to get done. That, and you're remarkably focused on the end user experience.
It's necessary. It's ridiculous that every time you do a commerce replatform, you have to manually weld that new commerce platform back to the OMS. And oftentimes that's the largest part of any implementation.
Mhm.
Now with agentic commerce, you need to dump orders somewhere. You have to. And, ChatGPT will not be doing integrations with, Sterling and Manhattan and all these, traditional systems out there. They can't do it. They cannot do it. And by all of us as vendors uniting together and offering up this one interface, you now have interoperability between us as vendors. And that makes a big difference.
And it certainly will encourage companies to embark upon that agentic journey, but also, the MCP journey. And, if you could talk a little bit about that. Where are we in the adoption curve of MCP, and why is it so fundamentally important to do that first?
Yeah, MCP is a year old. I think it might even be a year to the date.
Wow.
So it's fast, and in the age of AI, these things do move fast. And this is the basically only way that you connect up SaaS applications with AI. Everybody adopted it. Everybody very quickly, from Microsoft and Google all the way down through the whole ecosystem, have fully adopted this as the approach, and that's great. I think that's amazing that it's the tech is one, and very quickly everybody fell in line behind it. And that's now the way you connect up these applications. And what's great about it is it's not like a traditional API. In a traditional API, you have to mesh the two together perfectly.
Mhm.
There's no room for ambiguity or error or data mapping issues or anything, right? It has to be perfect. And it's really hard to build a standard like that where you're touching an order and order related data, in 500 fields, and have it be an API call. Instead, it's much, much, much easier to say, here's the tool in MCP. And whenever you want to drop that order to an MCP server, you say, here you go. This is it, right? And it does it magically for you. It's a big difference. So MCP is the enabling technology here.
What do companies need to do in order to best prepare themselves for developing and deploying MCP technologies?
Again, that composability foundation is really important. That's a big one. The next is having some competency in house on how to do it. So you need folks who are senior and also AI native. So you need the senior principal level folks in. You also need some of the AI natives just graduating right now who grew up doing this. They need to participate as well. So those are probably the top two. And then again, a lot of this just requires executive sponsorship because this is a different way of doing things. It's categorically a different way of doing things.
It's such a rugged thing to transition a business thought process
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form. And
Yeah.
they're having to do two things: change the technology process and the business methodology at the same time. It's like, hats
Yeah.
off to those people. And some of them didn't look that stressed about it, which I guess they were just on some sort of hallucinogenic, or they'd already taken part in the cocktail hour early, but now they seem pretty happy with being the Sherpas. So, I guess the next question is, since you've managed to get these standards done so rapidly, I would say, I mean, this is like news for all the OMS vendors. What can we do on the product side? for the PIM vendors. Is
Well,
that a possibility?
I think the organization could certainly support a parallel standard. Right now, we have the order network exchange. I could see a world where we're doing the product network exchange. I could see that. We've left it deliberately open. So I think there's more opportunity here for other vendors to participate.
Outstanding. Is there any other solutions category that you think would be well suited to the structure that you've developed and to this process of standardization?
I think a lot of the 3PL to 3PL communication has to get ironed out. I think that would be fascinating. It's a huge area of expansion in the future. And then just continuing to build out the standard and adding additional tools. I think we need more tools. Tools are great to have access to. You don't have to use them necessarily, but I think it'd be great to support additional tools. And, there are some things around, transfer orders, for example, that you could do. So we'll see. But right now we want to make this one specification, a huge, huge success first. Get that going, and then we can start looking at branching out.
So, Kelly, when you were a kid growing up in Wisconsin, were you the one on the playground that got everybody to like cooperate so that you won like the tug of war?
No, I didn't do any of that. No,
You,
I was a quiet child.
I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that for a second. I think I don't see you as an instigator of bad things, but I do
I'm
see
a
you as
quiet rules follower, and that's why I like standards so much, because the rules.
well, the standards can be very quiet. The standards can be very quiet. The rules can be very quiet. Indeed, indeed. Well, I very much appreciate you doing this. I'm sure that there's a ton of Global 2000 firms that are going to be just wiping some sweat off their brow over this particular hurdle being taken out in terms of their composable journeys. And
And brands are very welcome and encouraged to join. So go to commerceopsfoundation.org, and there you can register and participate in the organization. So, any random organization out there wants to adopt the spec, they're more than welcome to. They're encouraged to.
I
And
will
then
make sure to
selling
have
channels
that
as well.
link. Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Commerceopsfoundation.org.
That just makes
It makes way too
total
much
sense.
sense, doesn't it?
And you got the .org too, which is a nice touch. Very
Yeah, it
appropriate
is a
touch.
nonprofit. I mean, it is a vendor consortium nonprofit, so it's the right way to do it.
Well, it's as it is abundantly sensible, I would say, like yourself, I would say, yeah, I don't think we're going to get pushback. I think we're going to get accolades. And let me be the first to tip
Well,
my
we need
hat
to
and
get
say,
we need, to get the membership to fully support it and adopt it. So once we're in production and, we've got 50 vendors all running it, then I'll be much more relaxed about it. But until then, we're going to keep going.
anything that, the end users out there can do to, hold those vendors to that commitment and get them to adopt this standard
It's
quickly.
to demand the standard, because if you demand the standard, then you're putting pressure on the vendors to support it. And look, if you can take $500,000 or $1 million out of the cost of a commerce replatform by standardizing that interface, it's pure money savings, right?
That's our call phrase for this episode is demand the standard.
Demand the standard, exactly. Yeah, you have to demand it. That's how
You
you
heard
get
it
the
here
change that
first.
you want.
Demand change. Well, another, support change. There we go. Two great messages, but we're going to go with demand the standard because that's going to look great in print. But I
Yeah.
will have the links in the comments section for anybody who is looking to join the Commerce Ops Foundation, so properly named. I encourage you all to do so. Looking forward to standards working their way through all of the components of the composable stack to make things easier on consumers and businesses adopting composable technology. Kelly Goetsch, thank you so much for spending the time with us today to share your deeds and
I always
doings.
appreciate a good catch up, and thank you for covering the launch. This is going to be great.
My absolute pleasure. Kelly, be well.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks for listening to Martalks, the #1 podcast for e-commerce and marketing applications. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and while you're at it, leave a rating and review. To find out more about how the Rosenstein Group can help you find the right leaders for your client development teams in MarTech and e-commerce, please visit our website at rosensteingroup.com.